Every night, while the house slept, 18-year-old Becky would light the lantern to make beautiful beads and pour her soul into what she loves doing. But the people who should have protected her gift were determined to destroy it. There lived a young girl named Becky, a girl whose hands were blessed, though the world around her had not yet noticed. Becky's parents were poor, painfully poor. In their small house, feeding was a daily struggle, and school fees were a mountain they could not climb. Life seemed determined to crush their hopes before they could even bloom. When Becky turned 12, her parents made a heartbreaking decision. They sent her to live with her mother's elder sister, Aunt Sarah. Aunt Sarah was known throughout the region for being strict, blunt, and easily irritated. She did not take Becky in out of love. She took her in out of a cold sense of duty. Every morning, before the sun even shone, Sarah would remind Becky of her place. "I am the one wasting my hard-earned money to keep you in school," she would bark. "Do not come here and be a burden. Do not waste my sacrifice." But Becky had a secret. She loved making beads. These were not the regular cheap beads everyone else wore. Becky's work was different. It was unique. She saw beauty where others saw rubbish. She would walk through the dusty paths of the village, picking up colorful bottle tops, smooth river stones, and discarded glass pieces. At night, while the house was silent, Becky would light a small lantern. With trembling, careful fingers, she would thread, shape, and weave. She was weaving her dreams, one bead at a time. She was exceptionally good. The patterns she created were amazingly beautiful. But Aunt Sarah hated it. To her, art was a useless distraction from the labor that earned a living. Whenever she caught Becky holding even a single bead, Sarah's face would twist in deep annoyance. "Is this plastic rubbish what will pay your fees?" she would scream, snatching the work away. "Do you want to end up a beggar on the streets? Nobody will ever buy this nonsense." She would throw Becky's treasures into the dirt and send her on endless errands, fetching heavy buckets of water, pounding pepper until Becky's eyes burned, and sweeping the vast compound until her back ached. Anything to keep her away from the beads. But Becky's passion was stubborn. It always found its way back into her hands. Soon, everyone in the house knew about her useless hobby, because Sarah's daughter, Bella, made sure of it. Bella was Becky's age, beautiful in a sharp way, and incredibly spoiled. She hated that Becky had a talent she didn't possess. She hated the way a teacher at school had once looked at Becky's handmade earrings with wonder. Bella mocked her every chance she got. "Look at these," Bella would laugh, pointing at Becky's work. "They look like goat droppings. Do you really think you are a designer? You are just a servant girl with trash in her pockets." Becky would look down at her feet, her heart aching, not knowing that this was only the beginning of her trial. The mockery from Bella was like a constant rain that never stopped. One hot Tuesday afternoon, Becky was sitting in the back of the classroom during a break. She had a small string of blue beads she had found near the river. She was lost in her own world, moving the beads along the thread, imagining a necklace that looked like falling water. She didn't notice Bella creeping up behind her until it was too late. With a sharp giggle, Bella snatched the string from Becky's hands. "Look, everyone!" Bella shouted, holding the beads high above her head. "The servant girl is playing with her trash again!" The other students gathered around. Bella tossed the beads to a boy across the room, who tossed them to someone else. They laughed as Becky scrambled, trying to catch her hard work. Finally, a tall boy dropped the beads on the floor and ground his heel into them, crushing the delicate glass into dust. Becky sat on the floor, staring at the ruins of her creation, her eyes filling with tears. When Bella got home that day, she didn't even wait to take off her school shoes. She ran straight to Aunt Sarah, who was sitting on a wooden stool peeling yams. "Mommy!" Bella cried, her voice high and dramatic. "You won't believe what happened at school today. The teacher was so angry." Sarah looked up, her forehead creasing with worry. "What happened? Did you get into trouble?" Bella shook her head vigorously. No, Mommy, it was Becky. While the teacher was explaining the lesson, Becky was hidden behind her desk making those useless beads. The teacher almost threw her out of class. She told Becky that she is an embarrassment to our family name. The lie worked perfectly. Sarah dropped the knife she was using to peel yams earlier. Her eyes glowed with a dangerous rage. Where is she? Sarah whispered, her voice low and terrifying. Just then, Becky walked through the door, her eyes still red from crying at school. So, Sarah said, standing up slowly, you now go to school to waste my money on bead nonsense instead of learning? Becky froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Auntie, no, that's not what happened. Bella is... Shut up, Sarah screamed. Are you calling my daughter a liar? After all my suffering, after all the money I struggled to find for your fees, you want to turn me into a laughingstock? Sarah marched into the small room where Becky slept on a thin mat. She grabbed the old wooden box Becky kept under her bed. Becky screamed, Auntie, please, no! That's my hard work! But Sarah had no mercy. She took a pair of heavy scissors and began to snip. Snip, snip, snip. Weeks of sleepless nights, hundreds of tiny hand-painted beads and intricate patterns were sliced into pieces. She poured the remains onto the floor like a pile of colorful gravel. Focus on your books, Sarah said coldly, stepping over the broken dreams as she walked out. This rubbish will lead you to the grave. Becky collapsed onto the floor, her voice breaking as she sobbed. From the doorway, Bella watched with a small, satisfied smile. That night, Becky didn't sleep. She looked at the empty box and felt a cold, hard fire start to burn deep in her soul. Time passed, but the atmosphere in the house remained heavy. After the day Aunt Sarah destroyed her beads, Becky became a ghost in the compound. She spoke little and worked twice as hard, hoping to stay under the radar. But as she finished secondary school, her hope for a life of creativity seemed to vanish completely. Aunt Sarah wasted no time. Since I paid for your education, she said, tying her wrapper firmly around her waist, you will now pay me back with labor. You will follow me to my market stall every single day. No more dreams, no more idleness. Becky's life became a wicked cycle of exhaustion. From dawn until dusk, she was at the market. She swept the dusty floors, carried heavy crates of goods, and attended to rude customers who barked orders at her. By the time they returned home in the evening, her muscles ached so much she could barely hold a spoon to eat. Her hands, once meant for delicate art, were becoming calloused and rough. Every time she looked at her empty palms, she felt a part of her soul dying. The colors in her mind were fading, replaced by the gray reality of the market stalls. But a gift from God is not easily extinguished. Some nights, Becky would lie awake staring at the ceiling, her fingers moving instinctively in the air, tracing the patterns of necklaces she longed to create. The fire was still there, flickering in the wind. She knew she couldn't make anything in the house. Bella's eyes were too sharp, and Aunt Sarah's ears were too quick. They took pleasure in breaking her spirit, and she knew another discovery would mean a permanent end to her craft. In her desperation, Becky sought help from the only person who had ever truly seen her talent, Mrs. Miller, her former teacher. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Becky slipped away under the guise of visiting a friend and stood trembling at Mrs. Miller's door. When the door opened, Becky broke down. She confessed everything, the destruction of her work, the constant mockery, and the terrifying fear that she was losing herself. Mrs. Miller didn't offer empty pity. She took Becky's rough hands into her own soft ones and looked her in the eye. Becky, a light that comes from within cannot be put out by those who live in the dark, she said firmly. I will help you. Bring your materials here. My house will be your sanctuary. I will keep your work safe. From that day on, Becky began a double life. Every spare moment she could steal, she went to Mrs. Miller's. The teacher even used her own money to buy high-quality beads, silk threads, and polished stones. Under the shade of a mango tree in Mrs. Miller's backyard, Becky's creativity exploded. She made beautiful bracelets, anklets, and also beaded bags with patterns so complex than normal. Every Sunday, while the village rested, Becky was at her secret workbench. She poured all her pain and all her hope into her masterpieces. She was no longer just a servant girl, she was a creator. She would finish a piece, kiss it gently, and hand it to Mrs. Miller to hide in a locked wooden trunk. As the annual Royal Artisan Festival approached, the biggest event in the region, Becky began to feel a spark of hope. She didn't just want to win, she wanted to prove that she was still alive. Little did she know, Aunt Sarah was already planning a way to ensure Becky remained in the shadows forever. The village began to bubble with gossip about the Artisan Festival. It was the one day of the year when the social order shifted, and a person's worth was measured by the beauty they could create with their hands. For Becky, it was the finish line of a long, painful marathon. For Aunt Sarah, however, it was a chance to cement her own daughter's status. Sarah had enrolled Bella in an expensive apprenticeship to learn the art of intricate basket weaving. She poured money into the best reeds and dyes, convinced that Bella would win the grand prize, the workshop, the land, and the king's favor. But Bella had no heart for the work. Every evening she sat on the porch, complaining loudly. "Mommy, these reeds are too rough. My fingers are bleeding. I hate this," she would whine, tossing her half-finished, lopsided baskets aside. Sarah would simply soothe her, saying, "Keep going, my queen. Once you win, you will never have to touch a reed again. You will be the pride of this village, not like that servant girl in the kitchen." Becky would listen from the shadows, her heart beating fast, knowing that her own masterpieces were hidden safely at Mrs. Miller's house. As the festival morning dawned, the air was crisp and filled with the scent of wood smoke and excitement. Becky woke up early, her soul singing. She had planned to finish her chores quickly, run to Mrs. Miller's to collect her beaded treasures, and find a small corner at the festival to display them. But she had underestimated the depth of Sarah's bitterness. Before Becky could even wash her face, Sarah stood in her doorway, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "Becky," Sarah said, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness that sent a chill down Becky's spine. "My friend in the next village is finishing the dresses for the ceremony. You must go there now and bring them. If they are not ready, you are to sit there and wait until the last stitch is sewn. Do not come back without them." Becky's heart dropped into her stomach. "Auntie, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "The festival starts in 3 hours. Let me just go to the square first to drop off." "Drop off what?" Sarah snapped, her mask slipping to reveal the malice underneath. "More of your trash? You will do as I say, or you will find yourself sleeping on the streets tonight. Move!" Becky had no choice. She took off running toward the neighboring village, tears blurring her vision. Every step away from her own village felt like a step toward a lifetime of failure. When she reached the dressmaker's house, she knocked until her knuckles bled, but there was no answer. A neighbor finally looked out and told her the woman had left for the hospital with a sick child. Becky realized then that it was a trap. Sarah had sent her on a fool's errand to ensure she wouldn't be present to outshine Bella. A surge of defiance, a fire she didn't know she possessed, suddenly flared up in Becky's chest. She didn't turn back toward her aunt's house. Instead, she began to sprint back toward the village, not through the main road, but through the bush paths, her feet pounding the earth. She arrived at Mrs. Miller's house, gasping for air, sweat soaking her clothes. She pounded on the door. "Mrs. Miller, please!" she cried. But the house was silent. Mrs. Miller had already left for the festival grounds. Becky stood in the dust, her breath coming in ragged gasps, realizing that her teacher, her work, and her only chance at freedom were already at the square, and she was almost too late to claim them. Becky did not stop to catch her breath. She turned and sprinted toward the festival square. She didn't care that her dress was stained with sweat or that her hair was disheveled from the wind. All she could think about was the wooden trunk at Mrs. Miller's house. When she finally burst into the village square, the sight took her breath away. The area was a sea of colors, filled with the sound of flutes and the chatter of hundreds of people. She scanned the crowd desperately until she saw her. Mrs. Miller was standing under a small, modest shade decorated with fresh palm fronds. And there, laid out on a clean white cloth, were Becky's beads. They glittered under the midday sun like fallen stars. Mrs. Miller saw Becky and let out a cry of joy, waving her over. Becky fell to her knees at the stall, her chest heaving, tears of pure relief streaming down her dusty face. "You came," Mrs. Miller whispered, lifting her. "I couldn't let your dreams stay in the dark, Becky. I brought them all." Becky quickly wiped her face and began to arrange the pieces with trembling fingers. She felt a pair of eyes burning into her back. Across the square, on a raised wooden stage, Bella was standing next to her lopsided baskets. Aunt Sarah was beside her, fanning herself and smiling proudly at the passing judges. When Sarah's eyes met Becky's, her smile vanished. She couldn't believe Becky had made it back. Suddenly, the palace drums boomed, signaling the arrival of the royal party. The king, draped in heavy traditional cloth, walked slowly through the stalls, followed by his daughter, Princess Anna. They moved past the weavers, the wood carvers, and the potters. When they reached Bella's stall, the princess paused for only a second, her eyes trailing over the uneven reeds. She didn't say a word, but her disappointment was written across her face. Bella looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. Then, the royal procession reached the small shade where Becky stood. The princess stopped dead in her tracks. She reached out a hand, her fingers hovering over a bold, multicolored beaded bag that seemed to change hues as the light hit it. "Wait!" the princess gasped, her voice echoing in the sudden silence of the crowd. "Where did this come from? I have traveled to the city and back, and I have never seen such craftsmanship." The king stepped forward, adjusting his spectacles. He picked up a necklace of polished river stones and glass, turning it over in his hand. "Young lady," the king said, looking directly at Becky, "did you make these yourself?" Becky's voice was small, but it was steady. "Yes, Your Majesty. Every bead, every thread." A visiting princess from a neighboring kingdom leaned in, her eyes wide with greed. "I want all of them," she declared. "No," Princess Anna countered playfully but firmly. "I saw her first. I will buy everything she has made." The crowd erupted in whispers and cheers. The judges didn't even need to deliberate. The king raised his hand for silence. "It is rare to see a gift so pure," he announced. "Becky, you are the winner of this year's competition." As the villagers lifted Becky onto their shoulders, she saw Aunt Sarah and Bella standing in the dirt, their faces twisted in a mixture of shock and absolute shame. The light had finally found Becky, and no one could blow it out. The cheers of the crowd still echoed in Becky's ears as the festival drew to a close. She stood surrounded by the most influential people in the region, her hands clutching the official scroll that promised her a new life. But as the sun began to set, the reality of her living situation came crashing back. While the villagers celebrated her, Aunt Sarah and Bella had already slipped away, their hearts filled with a poisonous humiliation. Becky knew that returning to that house would be like walking into a lion's den, but she had nowhere else to go. When Becky finally reached the compound, the air was thick with tension. The gate was not just closed, it was bolted. Becky knocked softly at first, then harder. "Auntie? It's Becky. Please open the door." For a long time, there was only silence. Then, the small window in the heavy wooden door slid open. Aunt Sarah's eyes peered through, red and swollen with a mixture of tears and unbridled fury. "You," Sarah spat, her voice trembling with a rage so deep it sounded like a growl. "You came into my house as a beggar. I fed you. I clothed you. I paid for your books while you lied to my face." Becky tried to speak, but Sarah shouted over her. "You orchestrated today's disgrace. You made my daughter a laughingstock in front of the king and the entire village. You used your blessed hands to stab the woman who raised you in the back." "Auntie, I never meant to hurt Bella," Becky cried, her voice cracking. "I only wanted to show what I could do." "I don't care what you wanted," Sarah roared. She reached down and grabbed the small nylon bag, the only one Becky had brought from her parents' house years ago, and hurled it over the gate into the dirt. "You are no longer a part of this family. You are a snake, and I will not sleep under the same roof as a traitor. Do not call my name again. Do not come near my daughter. From this moment, you are dead to us." The window slammed shut, and Becky heard the heavy iron bolt slide into place. Becky stood in the darkness, the cold night wind wrapping around her like a shroud. She looked at her small bag in the dirt. Everything she owned was in there, but it felt like nothing compared to the weight of the rejection. For years, she had served this woman, endured her blows, and swallowed her insults, only to be tossed out like trash the moment she succeeded. She walked away from the locked door, her footsteps heavy on the dusty road. She found herself at Mrs. Miller's doorstep once again, her body shaking with exhaustion and delayed shock. When the teacher opened the door and saw Becky standing there in the dark, she didn't ask a single question. She simply pulled the girl into a warm embrace. "She threw me out," Becky sobbed into Mrs. Miller's shoulder. "I have no home." Mrs. Miller held her tight, her own eyes flashing with a protective fire. "No, Becky," she whispered. "She didn't throw you out. She set you free. You have a prize waiting for you at the palace tomorrow, and you have a mother in me. Let her keep her locked door. You have the keys to a kingdom now." That night, for the first time in years, Becky slept in a bed where she didn't have to hide her dreams. But she knew the final confrontation was still to come, as the king's justice was about to descend on the house of Sarah. The palace courtyard was overflowing with people. It was the morning of the prize ceremony, and the air was thick with anticipation. The king sat upon his throne, his face grave and regal, with the queen by his side. When Becky's name was called, she stepped forward, dressed in a simple but clean gown provided by Mrs. Miller. She looked different today. The slumped shoulders of a servant girl were gone, replaced by the steady gaze of a woman who knew her worth. "Congratulations, Becky," the king announced, his voice booming across the silent square. "You have brought honor to this village. We are ready to present you with your workshop, your lands, and your reward. But first, we must follow tradition. Where are the guardians who raised you? They must stand beside you to receive this blessing." Becky looked down at her hands. Mrs. Miller, standing in the front row, took a deep breath and stepped out into the open space. "Your Majesty," the teacher said, bowing low, "I am Becky's teacher, but I stand here today because those who should have been her guardians have failed her. Becky spent last night on a cold floor because she was chased out of her home for the crime of winning your competition." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. The queen's eyes narrowed, her face hardening into a mask of fury. "Chased out?" she repeated, her voice sharp as a blade. "In this kingdom, we celebrate talent. We do not punish it. Guards, fetch the woman called Sarah and her daughter immediately." A few minutes later, Sarah and Bella were dragged into the courtyard. They looked small and terrified, their previous arrogance stripped away. Sarah tried to speak, her voice shaking. "My queen, it was a family matter. She was disobedient." "Silence!" the queen barked, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Wickedness disguised as a family matter is still wickedness. You tried to bury a gift that was meant to shine. You tried to starve a soul that God had fed. People like you destroy the very fabric of our community." The king nodded in agreement, his expression stern. "For your cruelty and your jealousy," the king declared, "you will not be jailed. Instead, you will be humbled. For 1 full year, you and your daughter will sweep the floors of Becky's new workshop every morning. You will clean the market stalls after every sale. You will see every day the success you tried to prevent. The villagers cheered as justice was delivered. But Becky didn't feel spite. She felt a profound sense of peace. After receiving her prizes, the 5 plots of land, the cash reward, and the keys to her own shop, she turned to Mrs. Miller and hugged her tightly. "We are partners now," Becky whispered. Becky's life changed forever that day. She built a beautiful home for her parents and brought them to live with her, ensuring they would never know hunger again. Her workshop became the most famous in the region, a place where young girls from poor homes came to learn that their hands, too, could be blessed. As for Sarah and Bella, they performed their chores in bitter silence, watching as the girl they once mocked became a legend. Becky's story traveled far and wide, a reminder to everyone who heard it. A talent your enemies try to bury is often the very seed that will grow into your greatest legacy. The fire that started in a small girl's heart had grown into a light that guided an entire village.